Hi, so you're here to find out more about Bears and Honey. Well, Bears and Honey is a process, an idea, a thought that helps you take a more strategic view, helps you get really creative, get beyond your assumptions, and really help you get some new ideas to take you and your teams forward. Where does it come from? Well, there was an organisation called Pacific Power and Light, unsurprisingly, supplying power and light across the United States. They had a principle in their business of no fire hosing. And no fire hosing means that when somebody has a creative or different or unusual idea, you don't kind of fire hose it down and squash it before they get too far with it. And you've probably experienced this where you have an idea that's a bit different to the norm and sometimes, well, that won't work because or we can't do that. And this is what fire hosing is. So their principle of Pacific Power and Light was not to fire hose creative ideas. They had a particular challenge at Pacific Power and Light where power lines in the winter would get really thick with ice, and their engineers would have a massive challenge getting to rural parts of the States. Obviously it was no good for their consumers because if the ice covered the power lines and it snapped them, then they wouldn't have a power supply. Engineers would have to get all over the place. And they had this issue that wasn't good for consumers, wasn't good for their internal operations, and wasn't helping them as an organisation. So what did they do? They brought a diverse group of people together to address the issue and talk about the challenges that presented and to come up with some new and creative ideas on how they might solve this. Now, like any great organisation, they didn't think about just bringing engineers in or the operational staff. They brought in a whole range of different people to talk about the issue that in winter their power lines got very heavy, covered with ice and snapped, an issue for their engineers to fix, and equally an issue for consumers who want their power supply. So they had various different ideas, ran some workshops, and it was in a morning break where one engineer described a particular incident of being up on top of a ladder, looking down and seeing a bear in the vicinity, obviously worried for his life, that, oh my gosh, there's a bear and what do we do? Now after the break, they went back in the room and explained the issue at hand, the power lines getting covered in ice, getting too heavy and snapping, and how to resolve this. Now, in an environment of no fire hosing, one of their team members said, well, why don't we just get the bears in these remote areas to shake the poles? Now, stop and think about that for 2 seconds, okay? In any organisation you probably experienced, and I've certainly seen, if somebody comes up with a really creative idea, it's like, well, that's a crazy idea, that's stupid, that won't work. But because of this no fire hosing idea, the example is we take that forward and go, well, actually, how do we make that work? So the question is, okay, that's a great idea. How do we incentivize what's going to motivate a bear to shake a pole? Now, and I know from all those great pieces of research around cartoons that bears are obviously motivated by honey. Here's the Bears and Honey stuff coming in. And what somebody said was, why don't we just put honey on top of the poles so the bears shake the poles and get the honey? Now, again, opportunity here for an idea to be fire hosed and rejected, but it wasn't. It was okay, yeah. So the bears are motivated to get the honey's on top of the poles, and the question is, and how do we make sure that we get honey on top of poles? Now the obvious solution is bees. We put a beehive up there, but I don't know if you know about bees. I didn't, but kind of you think about this and you kind of go, well, actually bees don't do that well in winter because you'd need little bee woolly jackets, and that doesn't work. There is an end of a creative process. So, okay, well, how else would we get honey on top of poles? And again, a different team member said, okay, well, for motivating bears by putting honey on poles to shake these poles and break the ice, why don't we just hire a helicopter? And the helicopter will just drop pots of honey on top of each of these poles. The bears will be motivated, shake the poles to get the honey. When they shake the poles, it'll break the ice. Everybody's happy. Now, as it was, again, no fire hosing, so you've ended up with this idea of a helicopter to drop pots of honey to satisfy bears. You're at the end of a really creative process. Now, it was at this point one of the company secretaries suggests, well, actually, do you know what? She happened to serve for the American military, and she recognised that a helicopter generates a huge downwash from its rotor blades. So, well, hey, do you know what? You don't need the bears, you don't need the honey. If you simply fly a helicopter across the top of these power lines, the downwash from the power lines will break the ice off. So you don't need the bears and the honey, and all you need is a helicopter. Now, what's really fascinating from my perspective and thinking about this process for you and your organisation is, You have to go through the creative elements of the bears and the honey to get to the ultimate solution, the helicopter. But how many times have you heard the bears and honey idea squashed and fire hosed before it even gets started? So the challenge is to create a space for you and your teams to be really creative with no fire hosing, to explore the art of the possible, to see what you might do to resolve an issue that you might face, or to address an opportunity that you and your organisation might have. And the idea with Bears and Honey is that you allow any idea, and we've got a resources pack that will talk you through this. You start with, okay, with all the resources, all the people and all the time in the world, what would you do? And then you take those brilliant and creative and unusual out there ideas that nobody has fire hosed, and you run them through the cost value matrix. Again, that'll be the resource for you. You'll be able to have a look at that and say, okay, how do you take those creative ideas and refine them to bring them to life? And we've seen numerous organisations go through the Bears and Honey example, then come up with the creative ideas, and finally run them through the cost value matrix to deliver real tangible solutions that help them internally with their organisation, but equally with their consumers, with their customers and with their clients, to bring real value to what they do. So that's Bears and Honey. I hope you find that useful. And when you are using it, if you want any advice, come and ask. Or if you've got it and you're using it straight away, I love to hear examples of how it's made a difference to you, your teams and your organisation. Have fun with Bears and Honey.